My name is Omar Kareem, and for most of my life I was an Imam, deeply devoted to my faith and my community. I moved to the United States later in life, believing that my purpose was to serve God and guide others in their spiritual journeys. For years, I found comfort in the certainty of my beliefs, convinced that my path was righteous and unwavering. But one fateful day changed everything. My faith, my identity, and my very understanding of God were shaken to the core in a way I never thought impossible. What I'm about to share is not just a story, it is the moment that divided my life into before and after. It all began the year I turned 67, a time when I believed my greatest trials were behind me. But then came the diagnosis, stage 4, pancreatic cancer. The words struck me like a thunderclap. The doctors were straightforward. My time was limited, and the treatments available would only grant me a few extra months at best. I accepted this as a test from Allah, much like how the prophets before me were tested through suffering and sacrifice. I clung to my faith, whispering prayers through every chemotherapy session, believing that my devotion would be enough to carry me through. If I die tonight, O Allah, let me meet you in peace, I prayed, my voice barely audible through the pain. Yet in the darkest night of my suffering, my prayer was answered in a way I never could have foreseen. One evening, after an exhausting chemotherapy session, I returned home, feeling weaker than ever before. The pain in my body had become a constant companion, but that night, something felt different. A tightness in my chest emerged, subtle at first, then growing into an unbearable pressure. My breath became shallow, my vision blurred, and within moments I lost all control. I could hear the distant echoes of my wife's frantic voice, the sirens wailing in the background. Then suddenly, everything stopped. Silence, weightlessness. When I opened my eyes, or whatever part of me was perceiving at that moment, I was no longer in my body. I saw myself lying lifeless on the hospital bed, doctors and nurses working desperately to revive me, yet I was floating above it all, fully aware, watching with a clarity that defied explanation. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. A sense of calm surrounded me as if I was being held in an invisible embrace. Is this death? I wondered. Am I finally about to meet Allah? But before I could make sense of what was happening, I noticed something in the distance, a radiant light, unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just bright, it was alive, pulsating with warmth, drawing me toward it. As I moved closer, I heard familiar sounds, my mother's lullabies from childhood, the evening prayers my father used to recite, the echoes of verses from the Quran. The past and present seemed to collapse into this one moment. A deep peace washed over me, filling me with an indescribable joy. This must be paradise, I thought, tears streaming down my face. Praise be to Allah who has brought me here. But just as I surrendered to the overwhelming peace, everything around me began to change. Suddenly the warmth of the light faded, and an eerie chill took its place. The lush, radiant surroundings began to wither before my eyes. The trees, once full of life, turned black, their leaves crumbling into dust. A foul stench filled the air, something rotten and decayed. The peace I had felt moments before was gone, replaced by an oppressive darkness that wrapped around me like a suffocating fog. Then came the cries, agonizing, desperate screams that seemed to echo from every direction. Men, women, and children wailed in torment, their voices filled with sorrow and despair. I wanted to move, to run, to escape whatever this place was, but I was frozen, trapped in the weight of the darkness. Among the voices, one sound pierced through my very soul. It was my mother's voice. "Have mercy, have mercy," she screamed, her cry filled with a pain I had never heard before. My heart shattered. My mother, the woman who had raised me in faith, who had guided me through prayer and devotion. Why was she here? "No, no, this can't be," I gasped, but my voice felt hollow, swallowed by the void around me. I searched desperately for her, but I could see nothing, only shadows shifting, whispering, moving in ways that defied understanding. Then, as if the very heavens trembled, a voice thundered through the darkness, deep and commanding, shaking everything around me. "Omar, everything will now be revealed." In the distance, a throne emerged, majestic and imposing, radiating a presence so overwhelming that my knees buckled beneath me. Someone sat upon it, and as I forced myself to look, my breath caught in my throat. It was a figure I recognized immediately, the Prophet Muhammad. But something was terribly wrong. His hands were bound in heavy chains, and his face, usually depicted in reverence, was filled with sorrow. Deep sadness hung over him as if he carried an unbearable weight. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but the words wouldn't leave my mouth. My heart pounded as I took slow, hesitant steps forward, each movement filled with an unbearable dread. "This cannot be," I thought, my mind reeling. "Why is he here? Why is he bound?" The Prophet's eyes met mine, and tears streamed down his face. The sight of his sorrow shattered something inside me. My entire life I had devoted myself to, following his teachings, striving to live as he did. And yet here he was, in chains, in grief. My lips trembled as I tried to speak, but before I could utter a word, another voice, the same deep, ancient voice that had called my name, echoed across the space. "The time has come for you to know the truth, Omar." Before I could respond, something crashed to the ground before me with an earth-shaking force, a book. The impact sent tremors through the void, and I instinctively recoiled. As the dust settled, I recognized it instantly. It was the Quran. The book lay open, its pages turning on their own as if guided by an unseen hand. My pulse quickened as I watched in stunned silence. I had spent my entire life studying its words, preaching its verses, believing in its divine authority. But now, as the pages flipped rapidly, I felt something I had never felt before: fear. The voice thundered again, its presence shaking me to my core. "Who is Allah, Omar? Have you ever truly asked yourself that question?" The question struck like a bolt of lightning, reverberating through my very soul. "What kind of question is that?" I thought. "Allah is the creator of all things, the most merciful, the most compassionate." My mind screamed the answers I had repeated all my life, yet deep inside, an unsettling doubt took root. The voice spoke again, this time slower, firmer. "How do you know he is the creator? Have you ever truly thought about it?" My breath hitched. Never, not once, had I questioned it. Never had I dared. But now, in this place, standing before the chained prophet and the trembling Quran, I realized something horrifying. I had always accepted, never questioned. And now, I was being asked to do the one thing I had avoided my entire life, to seek the truth beyond what I had been told. As I stood there, frozen in the weight of this revelation, the pages of the Quran began to shift again. But this time, they were no longer just words. Images rose from the pages, taking form before me, unfolding like a vision. I saw the Kaaba, but it was not as I had known it. It was surrounded by idols, men and women bowing before stone figures, offering incense and sacrifices. My stomach twisted in confusion. "This is the Kaaba before Islam," the voice declared. "Where was Allah among these gods?" The words cut through me like a knife. I had always been taught that Allah was the one true God, existing before time itself, unchanging and eternal. But now, before my eyes, I saw that before Muhammad's revelation, the Arabs had worshipped many gods, and among them was Allah. The vision shifted again. I was transported to an ancient land where people gathered before a towering idol. They chanted praises, their hands lifted in reverence. Inscribed on the idol was a name I recognized: Baal. My breath caught in my throat. Baal. a name from ancient history, a name associated with false gods, condemned by the prophets. But beneath it, in a script that looked eerily similar to Arabic, was another name, El, and beneath that, another, Allah. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the ground, my head spinning. The voice whispered once more, its tone heavy with finality. Baal, El, Allah. Have you ever thought about their connection? A sickening realization crawled through my veins. Had I been deceived? Had everything I had built my life upon been a lie? My entire world was unraveling before me, and I could do nothing to stop it. A deep, unbearable silence followed. My own thoughts became my enemy, racing in directions I had never dared explore. Had I spent my entire life believing in something without ever truly seeking its origins? Had I placed my faith in an idea that had been shaped by men, not by God? I wanted to resist these thoughts, to push them away and reaffirm what I had always known. But the visions would not allow it. They pressed on, unraveling the foundation of my beliefs piece by piece. I had stood before countless people, guiding them in prayer, preaching about the purity and perfection of the Quran. And yet, here I was, kneeling in the darkness, facing questions I could no longer ignore. Then, just as suddenly as the visions had come, they vanished. The throne, the chained prophet, the book, they were gone. I found myself back in my body, gasping for air as my eyes shot open. The bright, sterile light of the hospital room burned my vision, and the frantic voices of nurses surrounded me. "He's back!" one of them shouted. I was alive. My heart was pounding, my body drenched in sweat, but I was back. Yet nothing felt the same. I had left one reality and returned to another, but the questions, the doubts, the voice, they followed me. The memories of what I had seen clung to me like shadows, refusing to fade. I had gone to the edge of existence, glimpsed something beyond my understanding, and now I was left to make sense of it. The days that followed were a torment, unlike anything I had ever known. The body heals, but the soul, what happens when the very foundation of your soul is shaken? I tried to return to my normal routine, praying as I always had, reciting the Quran, seeking comfort in the familiar. But nothing felt the same. The words that once flowed from my lips with certainty now felt hollow, foreign. Each verse carried a weight I could no longer bear. The voice from my vision echoed in my mind relentlessly. Who is Allah, Omar? Have you ever truly asked yourself that question? I had spent decades teaching others to submit without question, yet now I was drowning in the very doubts I had always dismissed in others. My wife, Fatima, was the first to notice. She watched me with growing concern as I spent more time in silence, staring into nothingness. She tried to comfort me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder as she had done countless times before. "You're not yourself," she whispered one night as we lay in bed. She was right. I wasn't. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. How could I? How could I explain that everything I had devoted my life to was now unraveling? That I had seen something in the realm beyond, something that made me question the very nature of God? I feared speaking the words aloud would make them real, so I remained silent. But silence did not erase the questions, it only made them louder. Nights became my refuge and my prison. I would sit in the garden for hours, staring at the sky, searching for something, an answer, a sign, anything that could make sense of what I had seen. The stars, once symbols of Allah's vast creation, now seemed distant, indifferent to my turmoil. I thought of the countless times I had reassured others in their moments of doubt, telling them that faith required trust, not understanding. But now, faced with my own crisis, those words felt empty. Had I ever truly understood what I believed? Had I mistaken loyalty to a tradition for a relationship with the divine? The thought terrified me. One night, unable to contain the storm inside me any longer, I whispered a prayer. Not to the Allah I had known, but to the Creator, whoever he might be. If you are real, if you truly exist, show me the truth, I pleaded. My voice trembled, my heart pounded, but for the first time in my life, I prayed without reciting a script. I prayed not out of obligation, but out of desperation. And then, something happened. A peace, unlike anything I had ever felt, washed over me. It wasn't the forced certainty I had always clung to. It was something deeper, something real. My eyes filled with tears as I sat there in the silence, feeling as though, for the first time, I was truly being heard. The following morning, I awoke with an unfamiliar sense of resolve. The questions still swirled in my mind, but something had shifted. I could no longer ignore them. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to research beyond the confines of Islamic scholarship. I began reading about the history of monotheism, about the origins of the name Allah, and the pre-Islamic beliefs of the Arab people. What I found both fascinated and unsettled me. The connections between Baal, El, and Allah were not just theoretical, they were historical. I realized that I had spent a lifetime dismissing these things as irrelevant, but now I saw them for what they were, pieces of a larger puzzle that I had never been willing to examine. As my search continued, I found myself drawn to the figure of Jesus, not as the Isa of the Quran, but as he was described in the Injil, the Gospels. I had always viewed Christians with a certain wariness, believing them to be misguided, their scriptures corrupted. But now, as I read the words of Jesus, I was struck by something I had never noticed before: his authority, his compassion, his unwavering certainty in who he was. There was no ambiguity in his claims. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. These words struck me like a thunderbolt. It was not just a statement, it was a declaration of truth. And for the first time, I dared to ask myself, could Jesus be the answer I had been searching for all along? The more I read, the more the words of Jesus spoke to the deepest parts of me. His message was not one of submission through fear, but of love, redemption, and personal relationship with God. Unlike anything I had known before, his words did not demand blind allegiance, but invited me to seek, to knock, to find. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. I was weary. My soul had been burdened for far too long. And for the first time, I felt as though I had permission to lay it all down, to stop striving, to stop fearing, and simply surrender to the truth I had been too afraid to face. One day, I found myself standing at the doorstep of a church, my heart pounding. I had walked past it many times before, dismissing it as nothing more than a place for misguided people. But now, I was the one seeking. The doors opened, and I was welcomed not with suspicion, not with questions, but with warmth. A man introduced himself as Father John, and without hesitation, he asked me a question that cut straight to my soul. What brought you here today? I hesitated, my throat tightening with emotion, before I finally spoke the words that had been weighing on me for weeks. I want to know the truth. From that day forward, my journey took a direction I never could have imagined. Father John listened patiently as I shared my experience, the vision, the voice, the questions that haunted me. He did not dismiss my struggles or try to force belief upon me. Instead, he simply invited me to read the Bible with an open heart. And so I did. Day after day, I found myself consumed by the words of Jesus, discovering in them a truth that I had never known before. Unlike the teachings I had spent my life defending, the gospel did not burden me with laws and rituals. It set me free. With every passage, every prayer, the doubts that once tormented me began to fade, replaced by a certainty that was not forced, but natural, undeniable. And then the moment came. One morning, As I read through the crucifixion account in the book of Luke, I was overcome with a realization so powerful that it left me trembling. This is the truth. This is who God is. Not a distant, unknowable deity, but a God who stepped into human history, who suffered, who gave himself for me. My heart broke as I understood, truly understood, for the first time. With tears streaming down my face, I fell to my knees and surrendered my life, not to an idea, not to a tradition, but to Jesus. That day, I was baptized, and as the water washed over me, it felt as though the weight of a lifetime had been lifted. The chains that had bound me, the fear, the doubt, it was all gone. I was no longer an imam. I was a new man, a man who had been saved by grace. From that moment on, my life was never the same. The cancer that once ravaged my body mysteriously disappeared, leaving the doctors speechless. But I knew who had healed me. Every morning, I wake up with a joy I never knew before, no longer bound by fear or obligation, but living in the freedom of knowing Christ. My family struggled to understand at first, and my community distanced themselves from me. Some called me a traitor, others pitied me, but none of it mattered. For the first time, I was not living for the approval of others. I was living in the truth. The words of Jesus had become my anchor, my hope, my life. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. If you are reading this, perhaps you are searching as I once was. Perhaps you have questions that you are afraid to ask. But let me tell you this, God is not afraid of your questions. He is not distant nor unreachable. He is near, he is calling, and he is waiting for you, just as he waited for me. I once thought I knew everything about God, but it was only when I let go of my pride and truly sought the truth that I found him, and in him I found life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. These words changed my life, and they can change yours too.